Hello all, and welcome to another edition of the Low Code Cafe. This is number 133 for April 5, 2023. Today we're going to be talking about some insights that I've put together about some workarounds and in the area of sanitizing HTML or unsanitizing it perhaps, and handling some certain inputs in other cultures. Hopefully this is a nuts and bolts type of webinar where we'll see some low coding and hopefully some things that you can put into practice. Let me introduce myself. I am Dale Warner, Head of Support for Plantin'. This event is one that we do every Wednesday this hour, every other Wednesday this hour. And it's an opportunity for us to talk about low code in general, our product in specific, and announce some things that are going on in terms of developments and release and things like that. We would love to host you. So if there's a content that you think that would be of value to the community as a whole, we would love to get in touch with you. So be our guest speaker. These are all recorded and put out on YouTube. So that's youtube.com/plantin'. And now we're getting into the hundreds of episodes that are available for you to peruse, and we're working on ways to make it easier for you to find that content. Today it's the Dale Warner Show. We're going to be doing a little from the trenches, and then I'll get right into our hands-on low-code development. Do engage with me though. We'll be you can use the chat or the QA or raise your hand and get right on the program. After the event, there's a feedback form. Let us know what you thought, what we can do better the next time, what you'd like to see. I'm still getting used to our new schedule, but it is presented bi-weekly, so the next webinar will be held on April 19th. And in at least 2 out, we're scheduled to have a guest speaker, so we'll be more on that as we get closer to that. We spoke, Peter Schottman, our product manager, spoke last time about our release 1.25, which is due out any minute now. And that's why I have it down as the beta pending, the release to be determined. But last I heard, we were about to start the beta period, and that's going to run, I think, for the better part of 2 weeks. So hopefully that'll be enough to test and find things and get them fully ready to release. I'll dive now into From the Trenches and just talk briefly about hot fixes. We have previously, in our 1.24 version, released 20. There's 2 more out there for you, and these will probably they're very specialized, probably not apply to very many of you, but there was an issue with the menu profile. In certain circumstances, that was for an internal project, a project that our team was delivering on. And so it's probably not something that any of you are waiting on, but it was fixed. And then there was a change made to the tokens module. The new resource manager module wasn't working on alternate portals if Plantin' was installed but not licensed on the portal. So that's not a terribly common scenario, but if that applies to you, we have a fix for that. Resource manager will work. Beyond that, I'll just say we continue to do a weekly event, the Low Code Campfire. That's Fridays this same hour, and I can't encourage you enough to attend that. It's an opportunity to interact with your fellow low coders, and we oftentimes see people get helped right on the spot, and lots of people in the room, so we get a lot of ideas, and it's good camaraderie. It's one of the high points of my week. So do engage with us for that. Here are some links for this episode, and I'll put those on the chat now. But if you want to join us on the Campfire, the link for that is there, and then also we have access to our recordings on the link to YouTube, the link to our community website, which also is a place where you can ask questions and get information both from our team and the community at large. And we can get the access there to the webinar feedback form. So good, that's all of the things. And now we will dive right on into hands-on low coding and my insights and workarounds. So the first thing I wanted to do is take a look at some challenging behavior that we have in our default model for some entry of some HTML type or special characters, let's say, in text fields, ampersand, less than, greater than. So let's take a look at the behavior. I have an empty Plantain app implementation, nothing in here yet. And so we'll go to entities. I'm going to create a new entity called sample. And so we'll do that first entity. This is just a place where we're going to put some data in so that we can see the challenging behavior. We'll put it right on the top level menu so it's easy for us to find. We're going to have a field called the name of the row, that's going to be our display name. But then I'm going to put in two fields, the text data field, which will be text, and the large text data field, and that's going to be, oddly enough, large text. And that's as far as we'll go right now. So let's take a look at the behavior. That's saved, and so now we have a samples entity, and we can create a record. And so we'll create a new record and say, call it test, and we're going to put same thing in both the text data and the large text data boxes. And so here's the challenging behavior. This pretty common thing where you want to put a couple of names in a box and use an ampersand. By default, some sanitization is taking place. The field gets sanitized. We'll look at that in a second. And so that expands to the HTML code that means ampersand. And when you edit it now, it has unexpectedly that same value. It's stable, it saves, you can edit it, but not very friendly. So that's that same behavior happens for some other characters. So I'm going to use the left bracket, the less than sign and the greater than sign just to show the behavior. So we'll put that in here. And so we get the same thing. These three things get expanded to ASCII HTML code counterparts. So less than, greater than, and the ampersand. There's several techniques that are available to change that behavior, and they range from the very easy to a little bit of low code, and that's what we're going to tackle today. So if we look at the way behind the scenes, this sample form was generated by Plantain app just because we created the entity. And when it comes up, we'll see what's going on with the fields. If we looked at the text field, and the large text is the same way, it's getting its data from a read of the database, which we're not covering today. But here's the problem. We've got the secure input value checked. It's checked by default. You can uncheck it if you don't want to use secure input. And that's probably the first and easiest solution to this, but it's also the least secure. So the sanitization, is that a word? Sanitized. These fields are sanitized when you submit the form, and there's some very important reasons why that takes place. One of which is if you don't have secure input turned on, it's possible to put script into the field, and then the script will execute, may execute in certain circumstances. So it's basically protecting you from malicious users, and there may be some other reasons why you want to do that. So it strips out, the secure input is going to strip out certain HTML tags, it's going to strip out scripting tags, but it also has this behavior of changing the ampersand. So we can, and the less than and greater than. So the simplest solution, and we'll try this first just to show the scenario. If we now edit this field and I only turned off one, by the way, so we'll see only one field is going to be updated correctly. So now it's editing and leaving it alone, leaving just the way we typed it. This one didn't get turned off, so it's still doing the sanitize. So if you have a scenario where it's an internal website and you're not, people have to log in and have good authorization, and you're just not concerned that people might be bad actors, you can turn off sanitize, and it will solve your problem. Problem done. Now you can tune out for the next 10 minutes. But if that's not the case and you need sanitize going, and I'm going to save myself some time here. I'm going to open this form in a second window. So right clicking on and new tab. So this will stay open. I can bounce back and forth real quickly now. If that's not you, then we've got to take some other steps. So we'll turn secure input back on, and we'll go back now to the old behavior that when you save it does those things to it. So now let's look at some other ways that we can take care of this. Sanitize happens from the moment that you submit the form. And so you can do other things. We've covered option 1, don't sanitize, and the limitation of security. You can do other things like reverse the secure inputs. The things that you want to allow, you can do that by way of tokens. And so we can define a token that will reverse what you want. And I've got one, and we'll drop it on here and take a look at it. But you're going to see that this has challenges. So this is an easy way, one within your control, but we might want to take a slightly more involved one. So let's do that. I've got this prepared here, so give me a moment and I'll find it. Done is to take a token that, and we'll just import it here. No, we'll define it so you can see how it goes together. So let's take a look at where this lives. So under tokens, there is a core token called string, and it has the ability, one of them is string replace, where you can say that you have some text and you want to match certain text and replace it with something else. So we could change that ampersand code to an actual ampersand before we save it, and then it will not have that bad behavior. It will intercept it. And that's what we're going to do, but I'm going to do that and do it in one stroke and do all of them, also the less than, greater than. So I'm going to create a namespace called string help. This is obviously very optional, but we're going to naming it string help. And within that, I'm going to add a token, and I'm going to call my token allow common ASCII. And it's just give you a clue about what it does. And I've got a nice long description for it, which will unsanitize common ASCII codes. And we're going to be using double quote as the delimiter, and that again is going to be our problem in a minute, but we'll get there. So the definition of this thing, and I've implemented as a constant token. There's lots of other ways to do it, but I've already done the work. If we go through this, there's 3 levels of string replacement, where I'm string replace string. The most inside one is we're replacing something called input. We're changing greater than to a greater than sign. We're changing less than to a less than sign. we're changing ampersand to an ampersand character. So we can use this. We'll do save and test. And if we pass it a value, it has value. If we pass it A and the semicolon B, A is less than B, do that, it converts it to A is less than B. So this function will allow us to do that. And so we can now take this token, put it into our sample form. So in our sample form for text, for the update button, what we're going to do is find the spot right before the update, and we're going to transform that one of these fields. I'm just going to focus on the text field. It's the same for both. So we could add an action that is context, and there's other ways to code this, but I'm kind of doing it the long way. We're going to create an update token, and I'm going to paste this just to get it off my clipboard. But this is going to be something like a comment here, allow these characters. So good. And I'm going to put it before the spot where update happens. So update sample uses p-text data and large text data and puts them into fields. It puts them into the database. And so instead of in our create update token, we're going to replace p-text data with the allow common ASCII of p-text data. And so this is going to capture, so sanitize happens, and then we unsanitize a couple of things that we want to allow everything else to remain sanitized. And so then the update happens on that. So let's see the impact of this. We go back to our site and edit the record, put in our clipboard. This one, and we'll do it here too, but we didn't. Anyway, so now it's automatically unsanitizing those things. But if we were to try and do some other things like put in some HTML, we'll put in an H1 tag and update. The sanitize is doing its work. It's not allowing an unfinished tag, but we are able now to very simply edit and put in the characters we want. It saves in the database. So if you were to look at the database and you're trying to search for something, you don't have to have your SQL search looking for that weird code. It can look for the ampersand or the less than or greater than characters. So very, very straightforward. Except for the problem that because we use a delimiter of quotation, if quotation can appear in your data, you're going to get my tokens is going to blow up. So you would have to either know that people aren't going, and I'm sorry, I don't know if you follow that. Let's look, if we look in our replacement, we're using quotation marks around our variables. And so when the variable itself, the input, contains a quote, now the quotes get mismatched in this expression, and no longer the expression blows up. So that's kind of a limitation. If you need to support quotes in there, then you could either ensure that your string didn't have quotes in it, or but if you need to support that, then this isn't the solution for you. So we move on to another solution, which would be instead of reversing it by a token, we can reverse it by a workflow with either SQL or JavaScript. So I'm going to dive into that one. We can create a workflow that's going to do this for us. And I'm going to call it very similarly. I'm going to go ahead and start by giving it a name, which is going to be allow common ASCII. Essentially the same thing as we had before, but what we're going to do is define an input called inText. And so we're taking in our text that could have these codes in it, And on the output side, we're going to have out text. And I'm just going to assume we'll create a variable called out text or a token called out text. And in between, the process is going to transform this for us. So let's see what that looks like. We can do that in a couple of different ways. I'm going to do both of them. As I've said before, my first language is SQL, so I like to do things with a SQL action. But it's probably more straightforward to do it in JavaScript, and so we'll do it that way too. There's still other ways to do it. But we're going to be avoiding the need for delimiters in this all around, so that is going to solve our problem with the quotes. So we've given it a title here, so the box is easy to understand. We're going to transform it and allow selected HTML names to get transformed back. And the SQL, I prepared this so that we can move along, but I'll explain it. The SQL says that we're going to accept a text field, so we're defining a text field, we're getting its value from our bindings, we'll do that in a second, and then we're doing a set of replacements. So within the text, we're replacing the ampersand with the character, the less than with the character, greater than with the character, and then outputting it. So the bindings are important. We need to bind in text to the value that's coming in from the parameter, which is called in text. So that says that the parameter we set up is going to be passed into the SQL. We're going to get output that's called out text, and so we will store the result there. So that creates our token that we're going to be using in the here. So let's save and test this. So if we just pass it ABC, we get back ABC. If we pass it and B semicolon, we get this character that we expect. It's done the transformation for us, and because it's not because it's not using tokens that depends on delimiters, we can pass it that quote and it doesn't blow up. So we now have a function, allow common ASCII, or a workflow, allow common ASCII, that we can use to convert our text. So let's see that in action. I'm glancing over here every now and then to see if there's questions, so don't hesitate. But we'll do this. All right, so in the same place here, instead of this create update tokens, where we were using our token that has its limitations, we'll delete this out. And let's just false it. If we say false, this will not run, so we can leave it in here just for reference. But what we're going to do is add the oh, I didn't refresh the screen. This gets me into problems. So I was working on a different tab and created something. This form that I have left open didn't know anything about that, so I had to refresh. Okay, so now we can look up our execute allow common ASCII. This doesn't belong here, so I'm going to close it up and move it. It has to happen before this update. The input that we have, we're going to use the same thing. So it's we want to take the text data and convert it. So, and then we're going to output it back. We can just put it right in the same field that it came from, but it's going to do this transformation to allow that common ASCII. So let's see this at work. So we have this leftover error from before, so we'll just copy and paste here and update. And you can see it's transformed it. Again, we're not working with that one. So so we've accomplished that and used SQL to do it. Pretty straightforward. I mentioned that you could do it in JavaScript too, which I'm guessing would be a little bit less of a stress on the servers, JavaScript call versus a SQL call, but could well be the same. So whichever language you like, and this is, here we go. So within the same one, I am going to make a little bit more space. And again, I'm going to false this out, so it's not doing any work anymore. And instead of using a SQL version, we'll use a JavaScript version. So we'll execute JavaScript on the server. And this time, I've prepared this. We're going to express the same thing in JavaScript. So we're taking in some text. We're doing the replace, and it's formatted with regex so that it will do all of the replacements, not just the first one. And so with the same thing, we're changing 3 characters to 1 character, and each of the same ones. So from a input standpoint, these the in text is available from the current context already. We don't have to do anything special to get it. It's based on the name of the input parameter. It's already there. So we don't have to pass it in this case. And then we are returning something called text that got created, txt. And we do need an output token for that. And that's going to out text at the same destination as the other one. And so we save that and test. And so we run the test, it does the replacement. So, and I guess we should test the multiple replacement. And it does that as well. So by the time we get back to our form, there's no changes necessary to our logic, because it's still calling the same workflow. It's just doing a different transformation. So when we do this, it's saving it and allowing it. So all of that work to say that we can sanitize input that are still stay with sanitized input and handle these common characters. Just as a quick review, those last 2 methods, this last method of using a workflow is probably, again, the most secure and doesn't depend on delimiters. All right. So now on to some other challenging behavior. And this has to do with non-US cultures. So you've got dates and times, local dates and times, money, decimal, all of our primitive field types work really well in when you've got a US culture code. When you have non-US culture code, we see some odd behavior. So let's look at that challenging behavior. The first thing we need to do is change our setup to be localized. And so if we go into our site settings and languages, we have the English language set up, but for those that have multiple languages, you do something like this. You'd add a new language and you would pick one. And I've been working with one here, so I'm going to stick with the one that I've, let's see. Yeah, I think that's the one I've been working with. It should be fine. And so we'll save that. And when you have 2 languages, and so we have perhaps one that's enabled as the system default English. But now when we go to our page and go to the home, you'll start to see that it's got a culture code up here, EN-US, and we have the other one that was set up. This is the code for that. And so now you're going to get different behavior depending on what culture code you're in. So for the purposes of this, I am going to create now two tabs, one for English, for other culture code. Let's flip this back. So we can kind of see the behavior happening well and poorly, and then we'll do something about it. So we got the ENUS version and the DEDE version. So if we go to our samples, and now we're going to need more sample information. These other fields that I was talking about, date and time, money. Let's make that happen. So we go into our sample and edit, and we will create some fields. So the first one I'm going to do is date field. And choose date. I'm naming them very explicitly so we don't get confused about what they are. We'll do date and time field. And I've gone to these because these are the ones where there are problems. So the other ones, as far as I know, there are not issues with those. So we've got money, and then we have decimal field. And that is going to be a decimal number. Great. So now we have these various field types, and we can take a look at what the behavior is. So we'll let it generate the form, take a look at it in the ENUS page, and we have our additional fields here. We can edit and make some changes. So we'll pick a date. We'll pick April 2nd for all these. For money, we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Decimal. Oh, why didn't somebody stop me when I did field with 2 Ds? But we can see April 2nd happens in all of the entries, 1, 2, 3, and 45 cents, 111 and 22 for our decimal field. So all those worked just fine in the US Culture Code. So notice the month, day, year formatting, the fact that it's dollars. When we flip over to the DEDE and look at our samples page, note that it's automatically, the listing knows that for this culture code, we should be displaying dates as day, month, year, and we're thinking in terms of euros. So money field will automatically show as euros. These are the kinds of things you're going to have to take into consideration as you're building your app if it's a multicultural thing, because obviously putting dollars and euros into the same field and letting us decide what letting Plantapp decide what symbol to show might not be accurate for your application, but just to illustrate. So all these are displaying just fine. Notice it's small, but this is a comma, not a decimal point. Same thing here. So the listing automatically has applied some great culture changes for us. When we go to edit, we're getting the wrong culture code applying here, and this money field is misbehaving because the comma is now being treated as a thousand separator. We've got a decimal point. So where we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, now we've got it with .00. So you're going to see that value change. This one is, let's see, it's showing with a comma, but let's see what happens when we save. Oh, it's not happy with that. It doesn't like the comma. And so let's see, we might have to change it to a decimal point. And now we've got a multiplication problem that happened here. These changed by a factor of 100. So it's just a little bit ugly. And so that's the reason that we're talking about it today. Workarounds to make this work in other culture codes. All right, so we have illustrated the challenging behavior. Now let's dive in and take a look at how to deal with these. Date and time is going to take a little bit of setup, so we'll do some setup, and then we've already configured it for other cultures. But we're going to need the thing that we're going to need is to set the format for these fields to the right value depending on culture code. And we're going to do that with the use of tokens, but let's see what it is that we're targeting, what we're going to change and set to make this work right. So within our form, when we look at the date field, the date comes from, it's from the database in ISO format, and the format defaults to short date. And that's ending up being a US format. That's part of our challenging behavior. So if we put a different value in here, and we can hard code this like day, month, year, you can use the expression button to put in your own format. And so I'm going to hard code it for day, month, year and save. So now when we go to this and refresh, bring this up, the date field will save as 4.4 is a bad one, 4.2. So it will show it in the right format. And yeah, but we still have problems down here. Trying not to pay attention to those right now. But we can change the format by putting in a date format. So let's figure out how to do that dynamically. So that okay, I skipped a spot. We go over here to our English version, and now we run into the field is initializing, but it's initializing in the wrong one. We've hard coded it depending on culture. So we want to make this nice and dynamic. So let's find a way to do that. I am going to do that by creating an entity that's going to hold culture information. And so we'll create a new entity, and it's going to be culture info. This is a hidden behind the scenes thing. I don't know if culture infos make sense, but we need a plural, so there it is. And for fields in this, for properties, I'm going to have the name of the culture code, and that's going to be our display name. But then I'm going to add the date input format. And this is the text is fine. And the date time input format. And I think I'm going to need it later, so I'll just go ahead and put it in here now. The input. I'm not sure if I need that one or not. I had it in my sample, so we'll see if we use it. So when we save this now and go to our site, we now have a new tab, culture infos, and we can put some data into it. So the idea is that we're going to put the right formatting for these different codes, and then we'll retrieve it at the right time. So the first one is we'll do the English US first, and these are the formats that are going to apply. So month, day, year for dates. The date and time input format is month, day, year with hour, minutes, seconds, and the time zone. And the money input format, if we end up using it, is going to be US dollars. I've done a little bit of trial and error to find these right formats, and so you may copy my work. You might have to do some experimentation in other locales. So then we'll set up the one for the DE culture code. And for there, it's day, month, year. So we've got that. And it's also for the date and time input format, it's day, month, year, but hours, minutes, seconds with hours in a 24-hour format. So it's capital HH, and we'll do EUR for euros. So now this table is going to, if we know what culture code that we care about, we can look up the right format that we need and then get there. But the question then is, how do you look that up? Well, within tokens, and let's find it here in tokens. There is a localization token, and we'll find it here. And it says there's a thing called localization browser culture code. So if we test this and pop that in there, it gives us ENUS. And if we're in a different culture code, it's going to give that one. So we can use this token to figure out where we are. So let's illustrate that. If we go back to our sample form, and I'm just going to put a static text here on the field on the form so we can see this. I'm going to say that I'm just going to display whatever our culture code is so we can see it at work. And kind of, this is a testing step that I do so that I can see and understand what I'm working with. So when we look at the form now, we can see here we're in DEDE, so it's accurately picked up that we're in a different culture code. If we're in the ENUS and look at the form, sorry. Did I get lost here someplace? Yes, I did. DEDE, ENUS, here we go. Nope, I want samples. The form is showing that we're in a different culture code, ENUS. So we can now use that token to get the thing that we want. So on to the work of getting the thing that we want. I'm going to create a token that will be date help. Now I've been a little bit over the top in creating my namespaces here, so maybe you would collect all these into one, but I'm just going to call it date help as a namespace and create it. And within that, we'll do a lookup, and the lookup is we're going to get the date input format. And I realize that we could do this all in one step, but I'm going to do it again, three different ones just to make it very plain what I'm doing. So the name of this token that I'm creating is going to be date input format. That's what I want to get out. So it's date help, date input format. And I'm going to do this by database. So we'll do a database query. And what we're doing is we're going to select out of our culture info database that we just set up. And we're going to look up the where the culture code is, whatever the current culture code that we have. If we were bright, we would default this in case we don't know what the culture code is. We would build in some error checking in case somebody's browsing from a culture. No, we know what cultures they're in. We've only enabled 2 on our site. Never mind. So we're going to get back the date input format as the data. So if we save and test this, we can now use this token to get back month, day, year when we're in the US and something else when we're elsewhere. So let's go to our form and incorporate that. Go to the date field, and instead of this hard-coded thing, we can now use the date help date input format. So let's see this at work. If we edit the field, and we're here in DEDE, we're getting it in day, month, year, so we're fine. We update that, and visually we see day, month, year, everything worked as expected. And we're here in ENUS, and our date field is showing as 4/2, so we're all good there. Just for fun, I'll change it to the 3rd, but so we've overcome the bad behavior just by providing it a dynamic date field. So, well, now we're going to go on and do the same things with the date and time. And those are the same format. So, with that, it's going to be very similar to the one that we had a moment ago. So, we'll create a new token here called date and time input format. And the definition is still going to be database. And we're just going to return a different field out of this. So date and time input format is coming out of our culture code, still using our culture code. So if we save and test this, now we get this longer format that's dependent on where your browser is working from. So we can go back to our date and time field and override, instead of using short date, which comes in, we can override that with our date time input format that comes from the file. And then in the same way, our local date and time field will override that. So now if we see this at work, we'll do English first here this time. Our date and times come in, we see 4/2/23. We can pick a different date for 3 at, let's do 3 in the afternoon. And we'll do that for our local date and time field, the same thing for 3 at 3 in the afternoon, and save. And so now we see it displayed that way for 3 in the afternoon. So we fixed our English. Let's see how it's working out in the DEDE code. So listing is still automatically, without any changes, it's still showing it in the format for that culture code. And when we edit, the form comes up with that same format. And this keeps getting worse and worse, so I'm going to clear that out. But we can edit those, change them, no problem. So this has overcome the bad behavior with date and time, local date and time. So we're knocking them down here. So to summarize, we set up a culture info entity to hold the information that we're going to need based on culture. We're using some tokens and our browser culture token, browser culture code token to get the right value depending on what culture is going on. So we have it's still initializing with the ISO date. We didn't change anything on that, but we set the format according to the browser culture code. So that's the summary there. So that money field has been bugging us. It's still it's been doing the wrong thing. We're certainly here in DEDE. So just a reminder, we put in 1 for the money field. Notice it's got a $sign. We say it changes $1 to 100 euros. So that's the ugliness we're going to fix here now. The solution is to change it from a currency to a text box. So if we go to our money field, it's used a currency type. We can change this to a text box. It's still getting initialized, but it's going to get initialized according to the culture, and it's going to get saved according to the culture. So I think that's all we're going to have to do to make this work. So back to our DEDE, and we're going to edit now and put in 1 for the money field, and it updates it to €1. And if we go 1,56, So 1/5600ths, it saves that as expected. So we're working well in the DE culture. We need to double check and make sure that we did okay still in the US culture. So we come in here, we've got, it comes up 156, that's correct. And we'll say we get a 225, we're using the decimal point, and it saves it as expected. So that one was pretty easy to overcome. There's some things that you're probably going to want to consider, which is adding validations, because the text box isn't limited to the characters that you could type. You could have invalid, you could have non-numeric characters, you could have things that would cause the update to blow up. So validating the values through validations, and if you're in this circumstance, we have some custom validations that we could send your way. It's a topic beyond what I wanted to get into today, but it's there and available. Okay, and then I didn't put it down here, but let's see. I'm trying to remember. We have good behavior or bad behavior. So our decimal field with 2 Ds is 1, 2, 3 with commas. That works. We say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and now we're seeing it's not a valid float number. So it doesn't like this in our decimal field. How did I fix that in my sample? Maybe I didn't. So I'm giving you a partial solution today. Because it's still. Oh, I know. I remember. I did. Sorry. I have a solution. Don't worry. The validators that come in with the text that came in with that currency field remained, and the validation that's going on is forcing it to be a floating point number. That floating point number is US culture centric. So just turning that off is going to allow us to do that. So now we can edit and put in, we can leave it as 1, 2, 3 and put it as 5, 6 as the decimal, and it will carry it forward. And if we do that in ENUS, it comes in with the decimal point, and we can do that. So again, better validators would be advised, but it at least will work. So summarizing, those are workarounds for when you have different field types in different culture codes. If you're using US centric and dollars, you don't run into that. But if you're running in other culture codes, you might need to implement techniques like this. It would be a great time for questions. We've got 7 minutes, but I think we're probably going to end early if we don't get any questions. Righty. Then with that, I am going to say happy low coding. I hope this has been of value to you, especially in other culture codes. I think there is a need for it, and there's some other techniques that are coming up that having to do with setting dates that I wasn't able to completely prepare. So on another session, we'll talk about how to implement being able to set and assign dates in different culture codes when you're manipulating the date. But we will see you next time and deal with that. And with that, I'll say see you guys in 2 weeks. Thanks for coming to the Low Code Cafe.